Los Angeles, November 1978. The neon glow of Sunset Strip painted the sidewalks in harsh electric blues and reds as Dean Martin walked alone through the late evening crowd. At 61, Dean had developed a habit of taking solitary walks after performances, needing the anonymity of night streets to decompress from the carefully maintained persona that had made him famous. Tonight, after a sold-out show at the Greek Theater, he'd dismissed his driver and chosen to walk the few miles back to his Beverly Hills home, craving the rare luxury of being just another face in the Los Angeles darkness. Dean had always found peace in these nocturnal wanderings. Despite his image as the ultimate cool cat, the king of effortless entertainment, he was actually someone who needed quiet moments to stay grounded. The martini-sipping, wise-cracking Dean Martin that audiences adored was both genuine and constructed, real enough to be convincing, but maintained enough to be exhausting. As he passed the entrance to a narrow alley behind the old Rainbow Room, Dean heard something that made him pause mid-step. Someone was singing. Not performing for tips, not busking for an audience. Just singing, pure and simple, with a voice that carried decades of training and an unmistakable note of profound sadness. The melody drifted from deep in the alley, echoing off brick walls with a haunting quality that seemed to transform the urban setting into something almost cathedral-like. Dean recognized the song immediately. It was an old standard from the 1940s, something most people had forgotten, but that any serious musician would know by heart. If you've ever heard someone singing not because they had to, but because music was the only way they could express what words couldn't capture, you understand the quality of what Dean was experiencing. Dean approached the alley cautiously, not wanting to intrude but drawn by the unexpected beauty of what he was hearing. About 30 feet into the narrow passage, illuminated by a single dim streetlight, sat a man on a makeshift bench created from an overturned milk crate. He appeared to be in his 60s, wearing layers of worn clothing that suggested he'd been living on the streets for some time, but his posture and the way he held his hands suggested someone who'd once known better circumstances. The man's eyes were closed as he sang, and Dean could see that his weathered face was wet with tears. This wasn't a performance or an attempt to earn money. This was something much more private and heartbreaking. The man was singing as if his life depended on it, as if the music contained something too precious to lose. Dean stood quietly for several minutes, not wanting to interrupt this deeply personal moment. But as the song ended and the man sat in silence, Dean felt compelled to approach. Something about the scene, the obvious musical training, the emotional intensity, the careful attention to phrasing even in such dire circumstances, suggested someone who deserved recognition rather than invisibility. "That was beautiful," Dean said gently. As he stepped into the circle of light, "You've got real talent." The elderly man opened his eyes and looked up, startled but not alarmed. Recognition flickered across his face, but he seemed more interested in the kindness in Dean's voice than in his celebrity status. "Oh, hello," the man said, quickly wiping his eyes with a torn sleeve. "I'm sorry if I was bothering anyone. I thought this alley was empty." "You weren't bothering anyone," Dean assured him, gesturing toward the quiet street. "That was some of the most beautiful singing I've heard in years. I'm Dean, by the way." "I know who you are, Mr. Martin," the man said with a gentle smile that revealed both dignity and embarrassment. "I'm Charlie Fitzgerald. Please sit if you'd like. It's not often I have an audience who actually appreciates the old songs." Dean settled onto another improvised seat, a stack of cardboard boxes, struck immediately by Charlie's articulate speech and refined manners. Despite the obvious poverty and difficult circumstances, Charlie carried himself with the kind of grace that spoke of education and cultural background. "Old songs?" Dean asked. "That sounded like something from the 40s. Most people your age wouldn't know material that sophisticated." Charlie nodded, his eyes taking on a distant quality as if he were seeing something beyond the alley walls. "I should know it," Charlie said quietly. "I helped arrange it back in 1947. That particular version you just heard, the one with the extended bridge and the modified chord progression, I worked on that with Tommy Dorsey's band when I was 26 years old. The simple statement hit Dean with unexpected force. He'd spent his entire career around musicians, arrangers, and industry professionals, and he knew authenticity when he heard it. Charlie wasn't boasting or trying to impress. He was simply stating a fact with the matter-of-fact tone of someone remembering his professional past. "Tommy Dorsey?" Dean said carefully. "You worked with Tommy Dorsey?" Charlie's smile became both prouder and more painful. "For 3 years," Charlie said. 1946 to 1949, I was their lead arranger and sometimes pianist, not famous like the band leaders, but I was good at what I did, really good. Tommy used to say I had the best ear for harmony on the West Coast. If you've ever met someone whose entire identity was built around a skill they could no longer use, you understand the particular kind of sadness Charlie was carrying. Dean felt a mixture of fascination and growing concern. "What happened? How did you go from arranging for Tommy Dorsey to living in alleys and singing for no one?" Charlie finished gently. "That's a longer story than you might want to hear on a Thursday night." "I've got time," Dean said, and meant it. Something about Charlie's combination of musical sophistication and current circumstances had caught Dean's attention in a way that transcended casual curiosity. Charlie studied Dean's face for a moment, seeming to gauge whether this interest was genuine or just polite celebrity small talk. "You really want to know?" Charlie asked. "It's not a pretty story, not the kind of thing you'd expect to hear from someone you meet in an alley." "Charlie," Dean said, "I've heard a lot of stories in my time, the pretty ones and the ugly ones, the ones that make sense and the ones that don't. If you want to tell it, I want to hear it." Charlie wiped his eyes again, then settled back against the brick wall as if preparing to revisit memories he'd been carrying alone for too long. "It started with booze," Charlie said simply. "Not the way you might think. Not performing drunk or missing gigs. I was too professional for that. But by 1949, I was drinking every night after work to deal with the pressure, the constant travel, the demand to keep creating new arrangements that would keep Tommy's band competitive." Charlie's voice took on the tone of someone who'd had decades to think about his mistakes. "I told myself it was just winding down, just relaxing after intense creative work. But it was becoming the only way I could turn my brain off. The music never stopped in my head. I'd hear arrangements, chord progressions, melodies all day and all night. Alcohol was the only thing that gave me any peace." If you've ever known someone whose greatest strength became their greatest weakness, you understand the trap Charlie was describing. "By 1950, I was drinking during the day too," Charlie continued. "Not enough to affect my work at first, but enough that other musicians started noticing. Tommy was patient longer than he should have been. He valued what I brought to the band, but eventually he couldn't ignore it anymore." Charlie's face showed the shame of a man who disappointed someone he respected. The end came during a recording session for Columbia Records in early 1951. We were working on arrangements for what was supposed to be Tommy's next big album. I'd been drinking since noon, and by evening when we started laying down tracks, I couldn't keep the chord progressions straight in my head. Charlie paused, clearly steeling himself to continue. "I ruined 6 hours of studio time and cost the band thousands of dollars in wasted recording fees. Tommy fired me that night. Gently, professionally, but permanently. He said I was too talented to waste my life on alcohol, but he couldn't keep enabling my drinking by giving me work." Dean felt his chest tighten with sympathy and recognition. He'd known too many talented people in the entertainment industry who'd been destroyed by similar struggles. "What did you do after that?" Dean asked. "I thought I could freelance," Charlie said. "Work with smaller bands, do arrangements for local clubs, maybe teach music lessons, and for a while I did. But word travels fast in the music business. When Tommy Dorsey fires you for drinking, other band leaders hear about it." Charlie's voice grew quieter, more distant. "Over the next few years, the jobs got smaller and less frequent. I was still drinking, still struggling to control it, and eventually, no one wanted to hire someone unreliable. By 1955, I was doing piano bar gigs in dive clubs. By 1960, I couldn't even get those. Have you ever watched someone's entire professional identity collapse piece by piece, leaving them with nothing but the skills no one wanted to buy anymore? That's what Charlie was describing. I lost my apartment in 1961, Charlie continued. Lost contact with most of my friends in the music business. Spent a few years living in cheap hotels, then cheaper hotels, then no hotels at all. My family had given up on me years earlier. My drinking had destroyed those relationships too. Charlie looked around the alley as if seeing it for the first time. I've been on the streets for about 15 years now. Sometimes I find temporary work washing dishes or cleaning offices, but nothing steady, nothing that uses what I actually know how to do. Most nights I come to places like this, and I sing the songs I used to arrange, trying to remember what it felt like when music was my profession instead of just my memory. The silence that followed was profound. Dean sat with Charlie in that narrow alley, processing the enormity of what he'd just heard. Here was someone who'd once worked at the highest levels of American popular music, whose arrangements had probably been heard by millions of people, now reduced to singing alone in back alleys, because alcohol had cost him everything he'd worked to build. "Charlie," Dean said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "do you still remember how to arrange? I mean, if someone gave you sheet music and instruments, could you still do what you used to do?" Charlie's eyes brightened for the first time since the conversation began. "Oh yes," Charlie said with quiet confidence. "The music never left my head. The drinking cost me jobs, relationships, stability, but it never touched my musical knowledge. I could arrange a full orchestration right now if I had paper and a piano to work out the harmonies." "Prove it," Dean said suddenly. Charlie looked confused. "What do you mean? Arrange something for me right now. In your head. Take any song you know I've recorded and tell me how you'd arrange it differently. Show me what Tommy Dorsey saw in you." Charlie stared at Dean for a moment. Then his face took on the concentrated expression of someone accessing skills they hadn't been asked to demonstrate in years. "That's Amore," Charlie said after a moment. "You recorded it in 1953. Beautiful song, but the arrangement was pretty standard for the era. Very safe." Charlie closed his eyes and began moving his hands as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra. "If I were arranging it today, I'd start with a solo piano intro. Just 8 bars of the melody line played very simply, almost like a music box. Then I'd bring in a soft string section, but not the full orchestra. Maybe just 4 violins and a cello, playing the harmony in a minor key even though the song is major." Dean found himself leaning forward, fascinated by the technical precision and creative thinking he was hearing. "Then when your vocal comes in," Charlie continued, "I'd have the strings drop out completely for the first verse, leaving just piano and maybe a soft brush on the drums. But for the chorus, when the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's when I'd bring in the full horn section, but playing behind the beat, giving it a swing feel that makes people want to dance." Charlie opened his eyes and looked at Dean. "For the bridge, I'd do something unexpected, maybe have the entire arrangement drop down to just you and an acoustic guitar, very intimate, almost conversational. Then build back up for the final chorus with everything, strings, horns, full rhythm section, but end it with just that solo piano from the beginning, bringing it full circle." Dean sat in stunned silence. What Charlie had just described was sophisticated, creative, and commercially viable, the kind of arrangement that could transform a good song into a memorable recording. "Charlie," Dean said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant." Charlie's face showed a mixture of pride and heartbreak. "I've got arrangements like that in my head for hundreds of songs," Charlie said. 30 years of musical ideas that no one will ever hear because I threw away my credibility along with everything else." Dean felt tears forming in his own eyes as he began to understand the full tragedy of Charlie's situation. This wasn't just about homelessness or poverty. This was about a genuine musical talent being wasted. Someone with the skills to create beautiful art being denied the opportunity to share those skills with the world. "What if," Dean said slowly, "someone gave you a second chance? What if someone was willing to take a risk on your arrangements, your musical knowledge, Charlie looked at Dean with an expression that contained hope, fear, and decades of disappointment. "Mr. Martin, that's kind of you to say. But I'm 63 years old. I've been living on the streets for 15 years, and I haven't worked professionally in music since the Kennedy administration. No one's going to take that kind of chance on someone like me." "I am," Dean said simply. Charlie stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dean said, standing up and brushing off his coat, "that I'm recording a new album next month, and I need someone who understands both the old standards and new possibilities. I need someone who can take songs people think they know and show them something they've never heard before." Charlie's hands began to shake. "Mr. Martin, you can't be serious. You don't know me. You don't know if I can actually deliver on what I just described. You don't know if I can stay sober long enough to complete a project." "You're right," Dean said. "I don't know any of those things for certain. But I know talent when I hear it, and I know passion when I see it. And Charlie, what you just described to me wasn't the work of someone who's lost his ability. It was the work of someone who's been waiting for the right opportunity to show what he can do. If you've ever seen someone receive hope after years of believing it was impossible, you understand what was happening to Charlie in that moment." Charlie began to cry. Not the sad tears Dean had witnessed when he first approached, but tears of gratitude, disbelief, and the first spark of self-worth he'd felt in decades. "I won't let you down," Charlie whispered. "I swear to you, I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Dean said, reaching into his wallet and pulling out a business card. "Here's my manager's information. Call him tomorrow morning and tell him Dean Martin wants to hire Charlie Fitzgerald as an arranger for the new album. He'll set up a meeting." Dean looked around the alley one more time. "And Charlie? No more singing alone in alleys. From now on, you've got an audience again." The transformation that began that November night in 1978 became one of the music industry's most remarkable comeback stories. Charlie Fitzgerald not only completed arrangements for Dean's album, but his work was so exceptional that other artists began requesting his services. Within 2 years, Charlie had his own apartment, a steady income, and the respect of musicians throughout Los Angeles. The album they created together, Songs for the Long Night, became one of Dean's most critically acclaimed recordings, praised specifically for its innovative arrangements that honored classic material, while bringing fresh perspectives to familiar songs. Charlie never drank again after that night in the alley. He said later that Dean's belief in his talent had given him something more powerful than alcohol, a reason to stay clear-headed and creative. When Dean Martin died in 1995, Charlie Fitzgerald was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. In his eulogy, Charlie spoke about the night a famous singer had stopped to listen to a homeless man singing in an alley and had seen potential instead of problem. "Dean Martin saved my life," Charlie told the mourners. "Not just my career, but my life. He reminded me that talent doesn't have an expiration date, that second chances are possible, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is believe in them when they've stopped believing in themselves." If you've made it this far, you understand something crucial about recognition, second chances, and the power of seeing potential in people that others have written off. The alley behind the Rainbow Room still exists, though it's been cleaned up and gentrified like much of Sunset Strip. But sometimes, late at night, if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of a song being sung not for applause or profit, but for the simple human need to create something beautiful in a world that doesn't always appreciate beauty. And if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, that talent doesn't disappear just because circumstances change, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop and really listen to someone who's been invisible for too long, then you understand why Dean Martin's decision to walk down that alley and hear Charlie's story became one of the most meaningful encounters of his life. Because the greatest performances aren't always on stages. Sometimes they happen in alleys, between strangers who recognize something valuable in each other and choose to act on that recognition rather than walk away. But the impact of Charlie Fitzgerald's rescue extended far beyond one successful album or one man's redemption. Dean's decision to take a chance on a homeless musician became a catalyst for a broader conversation about hidden talent, second chances, and the way society treats people who've fallen from grace. If you've ever wondered how many talented people are invisible in plain sight, Charlie's story provides a powerful answer. Within 6 months of Songs for the Long Night being released, other musicians in Los Angeles began paying attention to homeless individuals in ways they never had before. Word spread through the industry about Dean's discovery of Charlie, and suddenly artists were more aware that talent didn't always come in expected packages. Charlie himself became an advocate for what he called discarded musicians, professionally trained performers who'd lost their place in the industry due to addiction, mental health issues, or simple bad luck. Working with local shelters and music therapy programs, Charlie began identifying other homeless individuals with musical backgrounds and helping connect them with opportunities to use their skills. There are more of us than people realize, Charlie explained in a 1980 interview with Rolling Stone. Musicians who trained at conservatories, who played with famous bands, who wrote arrangements for major labels, addiction, mental illness, family tragedies. These things don't discriminate based on talent. But once you're on the streets, people stop seeing your abilities and only see your circumstances. Charlie's advocacy work revealed the stunning scope of the problem. In Los Angeles alone, he identified more than 40 homeless individuals with serious musical credentials, former symphony musicians, jazz performers, arrangers, music teachers, and composers who'd lost everything but still retained their knowledge and skills. Have you ever considered how much human potential goes unrecognized because we judge people by their current situation rather than their actual abilities? Charlie's project was uncovering exactly that kind of hidden capacity. Dean became deeply involved in Charlie's advocacy efforts, using his industry connections to create what they called the Second Movement Project, a program that provided temporary housing, addiction support, and most importantly, musical work opportunities for homeless performers. The project's first major success after Charlie was a violinist named Margaret Chen, a former member of the Los Angeles Philharmonic who developed severe anxiety disorder in the 1970s and had been unable to perform in traditional concert settings. Charlie discovered her playing Bach sonatas outside a downtown church, her technique still flawless despite years of homelessness. Dean arranged for Margaret to do session work for television soundtracks, which allowed her to perform in smaller, less stressful environments while rebuilding her confidence and financial stability. Within 2 years, Margaret was back to performing professionally and had become a mentor for other classical musicians struggling with mental health issues. Each success story inspired more artists to get involved. Frank Sinatra, initially skeptical of Dean's charity project, became a believer after hearing some of the arrangements Charlie had produced. Sinatra ended up hiring 3 formerly homeless musicians for his 1981 tour, including a trumpet player who'd been living under bridges despite having played with Count Basie in the 1960s. Dean taught me something about looking past the surface, Sinatra said in a rare interview about the project. I thought I was good at spotting talent, but I was only looking in the right places. Real talent can end up anywhere, and if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it completely. The Second Movement Project also revealed how quickly circumstances could change for any working musician. Many of the homeless performers Charlie found had been successful within the past decade. Their falls from grace had been recent and sudden rather than gradual declines over many years. This realization had a profound effect on Dean personally. It made him more aware of his own good fortune and more committed to using his success responsibly. He began structuring his concerts to include what he called discovery sets, performances featuring musicians from the Second Movement Project alongside established artists. These discovery sets became some of the most meaningful moments in Dean's later career. Audiences were consistently amazed by the quality of performances from musicians they'd never heard of, and many of these sets received standing ovations that lasted longer than those for Dean's own performances. Watching Charlie work with these other musicians, seeing how they supported each other and celebrated each other's successes, Dean reflected in a 1985 interview. It reminded me what music was supposed to be about before it became an industry. It was supposed to be about human connection and shared creativity. If you've ever witnessed the power of community among people who've faced similar struggles, you understand the special bond that formed among the Second Movement Project participants. The project's impact extended beyond individual success stories. Several major recording studios in Los Angeles began implementing policies to regularly audition homeless individuals for session work. Music schools started outreach programs to maintain contact with graduates who might be struggling professionally. The Musicians Union established an emergency fund to help members facing housing crises. Charlie's own story continued to evolve in remarkable ways. By 1982, he'd not only regained his professional reputation, but had surpassed his earlier achievements. His arrangements were being requested by major artists throughout the industry, and he developed a signature style that blended his classical training with contemporary approaches. More importantly, Charlie had found a sense of purpose that went beyond his individual success. His work with other homeless musicians gave him a reason to stay sober and healthy that was bigger than his own career considerations. "When I was drinking, music was something I did for myself," Charlie explained. "When Dean gave me a second chance, I learned that music could be something I did for others that made all the difference." In 1983, 5 years after that November night in the alley, Charlie and Dean collaborated on a benefit album called Songs from the Street, featuring arrangements by formerly homeless musicians and performances by both established artists and Second Movement Project discoveries. The album raised over $200,000 for homeless services and won a Grammy Award for Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance. At the Grammy ceremony, when Dean accepted the award, he brought Charlie on stage with him. "This award belongs to Charlie Fitzgerald and all the musicians who proved that talent doesn't have an address," Dean said. 5 years ago, Charlie was singing alone in an alley. Tonight, he's being honored at the Grammys. That's not just his success story. That's proof of what's possible when we stop making assumptions about people based on their current circumstances. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 8 minutes, with many audience members visibly moved by the recognition of how dramatically and quickly lives could change when given genuine opportunities. Charlie's acceptance speech was brief but powerful. "Dean Martin didn't just give me work, he gave me back my identity as a musician. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are, not just what their situation looks like right now." When Dean Martin died in 1995, the Second Movement Project had helped over 300 formerly homeless musicians return to professional work. At Dean's memorial service, a choir of these musicians performed "That's Amore," using an arrangement that Charlie had originally described that night in the alley, the one that started with a simple piano and built to a full orchestration. Charlie Fitzgerald continued the Second Movement Project until his own death in 2003. In his final interview, he reflected on the night that changed everything. "People ask me what I learned from being homeless, as if poverty was supposed to teach me something valuable. But the real lesson came from Dean Martin stopping to listen to me sing. He taught me that everyone has something to offer, but not everyone gets the chance to offer it. The tragedy isn't that people become homeless. The tragedy is that we stop seeing their potential when they do." If you've been moved by Charlie and Dean's story, if you understand the importance of looking beyond surface circumstances to recognize hidden potential, if you believe that everyone deserves a chance to contribute their talents to the world, then you understand why some encounters change not just individual lives but entire communities. The alley behind the Rainbow Room has been transformed into a small pocket park. There's a bench there now with a plaque that reads, "Music happens everywhere. Listen carefully." Most people walking by assume it's a generic inspirational message, but the musicians who know the story understand its deeper meaning. And if you sit on that bench on a quiet evening and listen carefully, you might hear something remarkable, not the echo of a homeless man singing alone, but the sound of a community that learned to recognize talent wherever it appears and give it the chance to flourish. Because that's what happened when Dean Martin decided to walk down a dark alley and really listen to someone who'd been invisible for too long.